welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. A high-profile meeting between Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán and Donald Trump is drawing global attention as debates intensify over Hungary's energy ties to Russia, its position on Ukraine, and its role within Western alliances. Joining us today on TVP World to explore the widest significance is Daniel Hegedüs, Regional Director at the Transatlantic Trust Central Europe. A respected analyst of Central European geopolitics as well as democratic trends, he brings us essential perspective to this evolving story. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good evening and thank you for having me.
So as we are still waiting for the meeting to actually take place, can you help us understand what are some of the key political or strategical interests involved in this meeting for both sides?
With pleasure. Prime Minister Orbán has actually two main goals with this visit. The first, he's seeking actually an exemption from the latest US sanctions that were introduced on Lukoil and Rosneft, the two main Russian oil exporter companies, because actually this is not only from the perspective of supply security a key issue for the Hungarian government, but actually energy prices are a main topic in the upcoming election campaign. The country is facing crucial elections in the spring of 2026. And another strategic goal of Prime Minister Orbán is to actually seek a symbolic victory after the defeat he underwent actually after the termination of the Trump-Putin summit in Budapest. He would like to compensate with this bilateral meeting in the Hungarian public and also seeks potentially small symbolic victories, what he can sell back home in the domestic arena if the main goal, the exemptions from the sanctions, could not be achieved.
Right. Speaking of the sanctions as well as the tariffs, this is some of the things that the Hungarian Prime Minister has been butting heads with the U.S. president. They used to have a warmer relationship, but of course it has gone down a little bit after these sanctions were being made. Do you think that this Orbán's attempt will be to try and charm Donald Trump in dropping some of his policies? And do you think that would have any amount of success?
It's a very good question. It's not only the question of charming. Prime Minister Orbán understands very well the transactional character of Donald Trump. And against that background, he actually arrived to Washington, D.C. with a couple of offers. In his basket is actually $100 million deal to buy from Westinghouse actually US-made nuclear fuel to the existing nuclear reactor, Paks nuclear reactor in Hungary. And he's also ready to announce the buying of American liquefied natural gas in the range of $600 million US. So it's transactionalism that is also involved. On the other hand, yes, I think that it might be actually a long shot to convince Donald Trump, because the Americans may understand that providing an exemption to Hungary could actually open the Pandora box, because in that case also India and much more important buyers of Russian energy could come up actually with the same demand, and that would obviously ruin the current policy of the US administration.
Right, you brought up a very good point. This might actually have wider impact than just Hungary as an individual country. But speaking of the Pandora's box, I'm also looking down at another box that could be opening is the fact that, well, Hungary dealing with the U.S. administration in a more bilateral way instead of a collective way that the EU used to deal with other administrations. Do you think that this might also set some precedents for other EU countries to want to follow suit and break formation in order to engage with Washington directly?
I think this is not necessarily a new precedent. Since Donald Trump and his administration entered power in the United States, there was a desire among European governments to forge particular relationship with the US administration. Obviously, Donald Trump also has some appetite to divide European countries, because obviously this is the way how he can more effectively exert influence and even leverage over members of the European Union. Although we also must recognize that even if not at the policy level, but at the level of ideology, this is a very particular relationship. So this ideological and partisan alliance between the MAGA wing of the Republicans and the Hungarian Fidesz party has been long existing, and actually this provides a very solid fundament for this relationship and for these negotiations in Washington, D.C.
Do you think this meeting, the results that came out of it and how that's going to impact Hungary's re-election going forward is some sort of litmus test of how much of a sway the U.S. administration actually do have in Europe, especially when it comes to these more populist governments?
I think there is a pattern that emerged that the U.S. administration is ready to support ideological allies in key electoral contests. We have seen that in Brazil, we have seen the support for AfD in Germany, we have seen some support for President Nawrocki in the US presidential election campaign. So I fully agree with you that most likely we will see some gestures towards Prime Minister Orbán, because obviously it's not in the interest of President Trump that a key ideological ally actually leaves this meeting, leaves Washington, D.C. in a weaker position from the domestic political perspective as he arrived. Actually, the stakes are very high for Prime Minister Orbán because he was very vocal about the fact that he is seeking actually exemptions from the sanctions. And if he cannot achieve that goal and arrives back to Budapest with empty hands, that equals to a political defeat. So I expect that there will be some symbolic gains, potentially that a new bilateral agreement will be signed on the avoidance of double taxation between the two countries. The previous one was terminated actually by the Biden administration, or that some energy cooperation agreements will be signed. I certainly expect that there will be something that Prime Minister Orbán can be back home to Hungary.
Right, like I say, the stakes are actually quite high for Prime Minister Orbán here. Do you think that there's going to be any outcome in this meeting that's actually substantial enough, or do you think that with Donald Trump knowing that he would come up with something for him to bring back home that doesn't really have any very impactful, make an impactful difference when it comes to the broader picture?
Define impact. I think even a small symbolic victory is now important for Prime Minister Orbán in the election campaign. And against that background, it can be impactful. I don't think that necessarily tangible cooperation agreements at the energy field can be made. So on the side of the nuclear fuel or LNG, there is opportunity for cooperation. Another key topic very close to the heart of the Hungarian government is cooperation at the field of small modular nuclear reactors. And in that regard, actually, their intention was communicated several times in the past. These reactors don't exist. Even though there can be announcement that a joint partnership will be pursued in that field, that Hungary purchases such reactors in the future. But I think we need to take all of these announcements with a grain of salt and look into their depth, whether these cooperations are really tangible and feasible even in the short run.
Right. There's another thing that I find quite perplexing is that, well, the U.S. administration, especially Donald Trump's stance towards Ukraine, have been shifting throughout these past couple of months while Orbán stays relatively the same. Do you think that coming out of this meeting, Orbán will be forced in some way to shift his position, even if slightly, towards one that's more favorable towards Ukraine?
I think it's very difficult to make predictions here because we know the mercurial nature of Donald Trump. And on the other hand, even if he is ready to put significant leverage on the Hungarian prime minister, this is not only a subject of the US-Hungarian relationships. We also know that Vladimir Putin has significant leverage over the Hungarian prime minister. And against that background, I think a very aggressive Trump can actually put the Hungarian government and Prime Minister Orbán into very uncomfortable position. I don't know whether Orbán would be ready to agree actually with a ceasing of the energy cooperation with Russia right now. But obviously there can be modalities, for example, a phase-out period of 6, 12, 18 months that can allow actually the Hungarian government some face saving, and also the opportunity that actually this phase out can be still negotiated with the Russians and avoid actually a fallout between the Hungarian government and the Russian federal state.
Right. There's also some speculations that Trump's a little bit more hostile position towards Orbán recently also has much to do with Hungary dealing with China in a way that is not favorable or preferable for the U.S. president. Do you see that being a key issue going forward as well?
Yes, I wouldn't call that aggressive position. Obviously, Donald Trump announced that previously that the Hungarians already seek an exemption, and he rejected that. Back in the past, there were negotiations between the American administration and the Hungarian government about the intensity of cooperation with China, and the Hungarian response was that actually it's not something up for reconsideration, and here again. It's not a matter of bilateral relationship. It's a triangle. Even if new forms of economic and energy cooperation will be discussed between Washington, D.C. and Budapest, the influx of Chinese foreign direct investment to Hungary over the past 3-4 years was unparalleled. And it cannot be even compared to the amount of U.S. foreign direct investment. And this is not something the U.S. administration can steer with political decisions. That's a very clear difference, actually, to the communist regime in China, which very consciously and deliberately used these investments as a reward to one of its closest and most trusted geopolitical allies, Prime Minister Orbán, in the European Union. So, of course, the Americans will put that question on the agenda. But again, it's not up to freely be negotiated all aspects of Hungarian foreign policy. And against that background, Prime Minister Orbán has a pretty narrow space to maneuver in all of these questions, because Hungarian-Chinese cooperation, Hungarian-Russian energy cooperation cannot be solely decided in Washington, D.C. through negotiations with the U.S. administration.
Right, so definitely still a lot of dynamics at play here, and we'll have to wait to see how this meeting goes down. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.